service from their families. And that was a big thing, yes.
What did people do differently during the war as far as activities, things? I mean, were people working longer or busier, or what did people do to try to forget about things, for amusement or entertainment? Did that change at all during the war?
I don't remember those changes, and not many changes in that respect. They were very conscientious about supporting the people in service. That much I do remember very definitely. And towards the end of the war, down on the same corner with the scrap drive, the big pile, that was cleaned off and put to the side, because by then things were changing there. And I remember very definitely Dad and several of the other men in the village. In fact, I have pictures in my scrapbook of that. It was all cleared. The lot was leveled. It was planted with grass. There was a nice stone walk up to an honor roll with all of the servicemen's names on it. And that was something that was pretty special. I felt that there was such pride in those days. And as we found in the 72 flood, I worked here in Elmira at that point of time, and I'm jumping way ahead of our visit, but people came together, people helped each other, people loved each other. It was a whole, it almost makes me want to cry. It was a whole wondrous feeling. And just, you were all one. You were united.
And that was something that you felt more
definitely
after the war got going.
Yeah, very definitely so, yeah.
Did your family have a radio? And how
Sure.
important was radio to you in those days?
That was everything. I remember doing my homework to certain programs. No, but I could work better that way. I don't know why, and I bet a lot of the young people did that, and we were allowed to as long as the homework got done. But the radio is where we first heard the news of the war. So that was used. It was used a lot after that for a lot of our war news, and we went to the movies, and I can hear that man's voice, the commentator, and I can't remember his name. It's gone. But anyway, in the movie tone news, do you remember any of that? I know you're a lot younger than I am. I'm 75.
No, I do.
But that was a big part of it. And of course, there we ran into a lot of the reporting of the news, which we didn't have by radio. So it was good. But we didn't have all the pictures, and we didn't know what the next battle was going to be before it happened, like we're having right now with Iraq.
At the movies, do the owners or operators of the movie houses promote the war in one way or another?
I don't specifically remember anything. They probably did, and I wasn't aware of it.
I mean, as far as selling bonds.
I'm afraid I was not a very good candidate for telling you some of this.
Oh, that's all right. Actually,
I was in my own little world.
Locally, and I guess we're going to be sticking to the small community you grew up in. Who would you say were the key people in Wellsburg during the war? I mean, as far as making the town go, making it run, organizing, and so on. I know you've mentioned a couple of people already.
Right. The supervisor and the mayor.
Could you name them?
There was Gerald Harbaugh was the mayor. Norman Carpenter was the supervisor. Yeah. But there were, through the fire department, I have to say there were a number of men who were involved there. My dad was one. Actually, I'm proud of him. He was 37 years the secretary for the fire department. And that's a long time. But do you want names of some of those men?
I guess to the extent that maybe you can remember, I think that for our local purposes that it's nice to have them. I mean, if you can't recall some of them, that's fine.
Well, Miriam Aber. Oh, gee, there were so many. I can't think. let's skip this
Okay,
one.
well, let me-
Maybe I'll
Yeah,
I'll come
right.
back
Well, let
to
me
it.
move on to something a little bit more that's related. All right, that's Wellsburg on the local level. How connected, let's say, in terms of um, politically important people, whether they were state senators or state assemblymen or our local congressmen, did people see those people during the war? Were they aware of how conscious were we of our state and federal government in Wellsburg during the war?
This I don't remember
Uh-huh.
as being much. Dad was a welfare officer,
Uh-huh.
and of course there was a great deal, because with men gone, there were people who needed a little support and so on and so
How
on.
did that work as far as you remember, this extra help or something? I'm wondering, did that go back to, was that a war measure, I wonder, or did it go back to?
I think it went back before that.
To the New
I
Deal,
remember there were, you have the food pantries and so on now.
Right.
Dad was the food pantry specifically, the one who took care of that sort of thing, and my sister and I got to weigh out. There would be big wooden boxes of raisins, prunes, dried apples, butter, and my dad was so innovative. I'm very proud of my dad, in case you don't notice. The butter would come in the big tubs like this.
Now, where did these supplies come from?
They came, I don't know, from Elmira. Further than that, I don't know, but I imagine through the welfare system.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, how the heck are you going to cut hunks of butter?
Yeah.
You know what he did? He took 2 clothespins and a wire, and it would be placed, so he had little pegs, toothpick pegs around the butter. You'd take it from here, you'd cross the clothespins and pull it, and it would pull just as smooth through that old butter. Oh, it was beautiful. And then all we had to do were to cut the portions out to go. And back in those times, the meat, of course, was not very plentiful. And if there was a deer that someone had hit, if it was not bad hit, sometimes they shatter inside. If it was not, the deer would be brought to the house, and then that would be butchered. And then that would be given to the welfare recipients. The doctor. Do you want to talk about the doctor for a second?
Yeah, if you would. I
Well-
was going to get to him. That's great.
Oh, okay. Through the time that the war was with us, it was Dr. Foster Hall who was our doctor. He lived up the street, and his wife, Mrs. Hall, kind of organized a lot of the bandages and all that sort of thing. So after school, we would go up, and sometimes it was the church ladies who would. And in the good weather, we used to sit out on the house front porch, which was a nice big veranda, and we would, they started with clean sheets for the bandages to send to the servicemen, and they'd be torn and wrapped and rolled, I should say, and put in shape to go. And then some of the ladies who were talented a lot more than I was, because I get upset when I try to knit. I can knit fine, but I can't purl. But anyway, they knitted socks, and they were to send to the servicemen. And so Mrs. Hall did a very good service there, the doctor's wife.
During the war, were you conscious in any way of people being worried about how the war was going? Was that anything? I know as a
I think there was
student-
optimism. There was always optimism. I can't remember of worry, and I think with Dad being as involved in things, I think I would have heard if there had been something that was really a difficult
So even
situation.
after Pearl Harbor, when it must have been a shock, I would think, to everyone, and
Oh,
we were
sure.
plunged into war, and
That's right.
the news showed that we were most concerned with the Japanese, I guess, at that time, the Japanese advancing on every front. I mean, people seemed pretty confident then.
Basically, so, well, Pearl Harbor, frankly, I think that our president, Roosevelt, he is the one who made the whole difference in my estimation, from what I have seen and known.
from the standpoint of helping people feel
Yeah,
confident, more confident in the future.
definitely.
Did people seem to be aware at all that the war was turning, or that the tide had turned, that victory was assured? Did that seem to be something? I mean, when did people seem to be aware that that the light was there at the end of the tunnel? I mean, that the war...
No, that again, I cannot tell you. I was just too young and too absorbed in my own things to be able to really express that. I do remember when the false VJ Day came. And oh man, that was incredible. You know, it was the end of something. It was a lifting. It was a spirit lifter. It was just tremendous. And what happened? Everybody, you should have seen Elmira. Oh God, you should have seen Elmira. We came up in our cars, loaded, packed on the running boards. Everybody was so thrilled. We did snake dances through the city. It was incredible. People were so happy at the end of that time. It was very special.
Okay, now was that the actual VJ Day?
No, that
Okay,
came,
well,
that
what did
came,
you-
a,
what
that
did you
came a
mean?
little later. But,
Okay, what did you mean then by that false VJ
well,
Day?
we thought that it was the end of the war, according to what we were told. But then there was a little bit more that had to go on beyond that, and we had the victory in Europe before that. So
So there'd been some kind of a news
there had
report.
been, yeah, but that release was not like the one. Oh God, it was a wondrous thing. When we heard that, it was just.
Do
I
you
can't
remember
really-
one, let's see, the VE Day was in May, I guess,
Right.
and VJ Day was in August, the same year. Do you remember there being any more joy expressed for either of the days, or?
I think when the final blow, shall I say, not the blow, final finish came, it didn't compare with the false VJ Day, because we had been under for so many years, you know, and it was just, oh, super great. Everybody was hugging and kissing and dancing and shouting and singing, and it was, oh, everybody. You know, we did also, going back, I'll go back now, we did have Samson close by. And being
No,
there, we
what-
always had
can you tell us
servicemen on our
what
streets.
Samson is?
What it is,
Yeah, what-
it was
what
the
it was.
naval, it was one of the naval bases.
Located
And it was
at
out to upon Seneca Lake.
the north end of Seneca Lake.
And it was one of the training centers for many of the service people who went. I don't know further than that, but I know that a lot of their leaves were spent down in Elmira area, and as a result, we had, you know, there were always people around, and it was kind of a fun time. You go to the movies, so you might end up going by yourself, but you might end up coming out of the theater with somebody for a burger or something like that. So that was.
Did people in Wellsburg ever hear anything about German and Italian prisoners that were kept in the Horseheads area? There was I guess, a holding point
Mm-hmm.
that they were kept during the war.
Did
Did any of these prisoners ever work on any of the farms locally?
not that I've ever heard of, no. But I couldn't miss, because as I said, I'm in my own private little world in those days.
I was wondering, was there any military happening, event, battle that somehow came to your attention when you were in school, so that you remembered it, or you remember it today as being important, or learning or thinking at the time that it was important?
Dead silence.
Okay.
I don't really think of anything that was specifically. Now there were things like Anzio Beachhead. You know, there were many times that there were battles, and each one, I guess, we kind of fought on our own minds along with it. But
of course, the end to the Pacific War was a couple of atomic bombs that people didn't know anything about.
right.
Do you remember hearing about them or wondering about
Oh, yeah.
them, or?
The word Hiroshima came to be quite a scary thing, but I think it was the effect on people of those bombs that was what was the terrible part.
What do you remember hearing or learning about that
Well,
at the time?
just how the injuries to the Japanese people, and you know it did a lot of damage to them, many of them.
So to this day, you can remember that there were some details
Sure.
reported
Sure.
about, the impact of this
Mhm.
bomb and how it actually affected people. How did Wellsburg begin to change as the war came to an end and people began to come home?
I think basically we became more cosmopolitan. The cards began to be available again for one thing, and anything of that nature was something that, how am I going to say this? As automobiles began to spread the country itself out, and the population did spread, and pretty quick, Aunt and Uncle maybe lived out in Toledo, and that kind of thing. We were a more diverse population in all respects, and I think Wellsburg was a part of that.
Do you think that men coming back from the war, or maybe women, because they
Now,
too,
at least.
do you remember any of them being different because they had gone to faraway places or experienced things? I mean, you used the word cosmopolitan. I was wondering if you kind of noted any changes maybe in people or remembered any.
I don't really think that there was that much. For instance, we did have Marion Burnham. She was a missionary, and she was overseas after that for a long period of time. But I don't really think of too many people in the village who reached out in any great amount. We were kind of maybe isolated in a way, but we have always been a bedroom community. We haven't had a great many businesses. It's always been, from way back in the very early days, it's always been stores and shops there for the local people, but it was not a place that somebody would come to shop. Like we go to the mall now, forget it. It was just more local.
So if you had to sum up the war's impact on Wellsburg, would you say that it was for the better or for the worse? I mean, as you remember Wellsburg before and after the war?
I think probably it was for the better for a little while, and then eventually we came to the point where suddenly the school was beginning part by part to move out, and we lost one of our best centers for the young people in our community. And that, to me, was the toughest and worst part of it all. It happened through the 50s and 60s. That was a little ways after the war, really, but...
Were there a lot of casualties during the war from local people?
No, we had
men?
probably 3 or 4 in our general vicinity, but not very many. But we did have a lot of service people. In fact, as Marie Blitz, who... her husband has charge of the cemetery, Ashland Cemetery, and as she and I have worked on cemetery records down there, there is a whole list of veterans. But of course, the veterans from the old cemetery go way, way back to the very early days. But we did our part.
Is there anything else that you think that maybe perhaps is important that we ought to know about
Gosh,
your
yes.
experience during World
Gosh,
War
yes,
II?
my experience. I finally got old enough so that between junior and senior year, I went to Eclipse 3 with 3 other girls, and we got jobs, and we worked on fuse teardown the whole summer. And at the end of the summer, that was VJ Day, the false VJ Day, and then that was the...
Was that a temporary job for you?
Yeah, because I had the senior year to go, and then I wanted college, which I didn't get because of the veterans coming back.
What do you remember about the work that you did and the hours that you worked and so on?
Well, basically, we were in a big room, and there was a huge, and I cannot tell you.
And this company
Tom,
was, for the
what?
record, huh?
Eclipse, the Eclipse plant, and it was Eclipse 3 over on South Main, in Southport. And I remember where Remington Rand later was. And they handled fuse tear down over there, and that's what we did. We just took the fuses apart, and then they were reloaded with new powder rings. And there was a huge big...
These were for artillery shells or bombs?
The Norton bomb site was involved there.
Right.
But I cannot tell you exactly what, you know, they never did explain it. We just were there working, and that's what they wanted, was somebody to work. And we sang, but you couldn't hear yourself talk. There was a huge, and I don't know what the machine was, a generator of some kind that was the whole side of the room, and it was so loud all the time that you really couldn't talk and visit nicely with people. But that's all right, they didn't expect us to do that.
How did you get to work each day?
The bus. We had a bus that ran, Carpenter's bus, and it ran through the war days and then on beyond that. But that was one of the ways that it helped as far as driving was concerned in the cars.
The trolley had stopped out to...
Oh gosh, yes,
Yeah.
1930.
Oh, 30?
So, yeah, it started in 1909 and went through 1930. Now don't get me started on the trolley.
No.
I'm really into that.
No, I won't. Okay, well, I think at this point for our recording, I'm going to say that we will move on to another area of interest. We agreed that there wasn't much to say about the Korean War era, but because your son was involved in the Vietnam War, there are some very specific things that you remember about that and also would like to say about that. So why don't we move ahead to that, and you start us off by telling us what year this was and what your son was doing and so on, and how he became to be involved.
He was in college. He had 2 years up at SUNY Potsdam, and his number came up. Now they drafted in this war like they did in World War II. They have not done that in every war, but this war they did, and his number was low, and his girlfriend was over in Spain teaching, and so the last semester he went and signed up. First of all, he signed up for the Marines, and then he went over so they could have a little time together before he went.
So he was not drafted.
No, but his
probably
number was
would
so
have been,
low
right,
that he would have been.
Uh-huh.
So rather than, he didn't want to. The Army grunts it's really a terrible place. You know, it must be terrible for their work, what they do. They must suffer an awful lot, I think. But gosh darn, I found out Marines do too.
I think so.
So then he came back and went into service June 11th. We saw him off. And
And this was what year?
74. It was the beginning of the... he wasn't in all that long. He was in through training and graduated Camp Lejeune and went overseas almost immediately to Vietnam. And, oh gosh, I cannot tell you. I've tried to shut a lot of this out of my mind.
I'm sure you have.
Because it was not good. I know the packages we sent over with the soap and so on, and he would say soap hardly did any good because the rivers were so dirty that they were washing, you know, to take a bath in and all that. It wasn't an easy time for any of those boys. And he was in the Marines, and they were cleaning out a bunker. And there were several of them doing it, and everything was being thrown into a pile to be blown up, to be destroyed. And something happened that one of the rockets were not defused, and it blew up in Mike Denai. And he had shrapnel too near the brain. They couldn't do surgery, and he still carries that with him to this day. But this is, I'm sorry, this is an effect on his mother. After all these years, it's still very with me.
Of course it is.
And he was helicoptered out to a hospital ship, and it was days on the hospital ship when they took care of him. And one of the things that came back from the Red Cross was that they were so pleased with Mike because in all of his own trouble and damage, he would visit other men on the ship who were bedridden and so on, and he would joke with them and laugh with them, and he would remove his eye, which was not an eye yet, but just, and make fun about it and try to ease them in their own burdens. And I felt that was something special about my Mike. He went by plane, and they routed him by Alaska, and they took them off the plane and to a building for a few minutes, of rest and chance to move around and so on. And they never, now he was in Vietnam, where the weather was what it was. They took them to Alaska. The service never gave them a coat to wear. They were in their shirt sleeves transported into that building and transported back to the helicopter. We got word that he would be coming into Syracuse to the airport up there. Judy, his wife, was in the last throes of pregnancy. It was bad weather. The driving was bad. It was really cold. Pardon?
What time of the year was this?
I was back in November in that period of time. And it was really, really cold. And the mother in me dragged out a heavy overcoat. I had no idea what condition he was coming home in. I just dragged out a heavy overcoat because that was the one way I could take care of my boy. And so Judy, in her last travail of pregnancy, and our younger son and my husband and I went up to meet him. And we waited in the airport, and they finally said that the plane had come in. And Mike came walking down the airport in his short sleeves, his lightweight uniform. His eye, the socket was still very, very, very hugely blown up. And they have like a ball that they put in to hold the eye open. But he could never, there was no nerve or anything left behind the eye. That was it. There was no way, right. He didn't have his patch on. I don't know whether, he must have had one at that point. But all I can see is that boy. And think what was wrong with the Marine Corps. What was wrong with the service that they did not take care of their boys. I don't want to say anymore. He got through, but it has changed his life. It tore the marriage up in the long run. Everything changed for him, and it changed the whole family. And now I'm looking at Iraq, and I'm thinking of these boys who are missing in action, and I'm thinking of the ones who have been killed, and the girls, and the ones who are to be killed. And I'm thinking how I hate war.
Yeah, I think maybe we should say right now that for anyone who's listening to this, that we are in the middle of a war again as we we're doing this interview.
Less than a week into a war.
This is the second Persian Gulf War, and by all accounts, it's proceeding not as smoothly as people thought. So I think it brings back a lot of memories of another war that somehow didn't go as advertised.
I'm sorry.
No, was Mike an officer?
No, he wasn't in long enough. No, he never got to that point.
Uh-huh. Do you recall whether? Now, what year was this? I'm trying to get.
Back in 1974.
So that was toward the end of the war.
By the time that it happened to him.
Yeah, so that was toward the end. Would this action have occurred in the southern part of Vietnam, do you know, or you're
I
not
can't
sure
remember
as
at
to
this
exactly
point. The
where-
names confuse me.
Mhm.
We were with him all the way, but it's right now, the names, you read the names on the maps, and my goodness, they are so different that they're hard to digest.
Before your son went in or signed up or volunteered for the Marines, what was his attitude about the war as to
Not
whether we
cocky,
should be...
not cocky, but he felt that he would rather, if he could, be in the branch of service that he wanted to be in, rather than just to have to go because his number came up.
Did he have an idea about whether this was a war we should be fighting or not? And what about you and your husband and other people you knew?
To me, Vietnam was a wrong war. I don't think that we should have been there at all. And it certainly extended a great deal longer than it should have. What do we gain? Nothing.
I guess what I'd like you to try to do is to go back to that time, though, before he was going in. I mean, we've all concluded that war was bad.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not as easy to remember what we were thinking early on in the war, or earlier on in the war. I mean, when Mike must have gone into the service in 73 or somewhere thereabouts, 73, and you said 74.
Yeah, he went June 11th, and then he came back. He was actually out of service. You know, that's another thing. He never has received a Purple Heart even. I don't understand. I just don't understand.
By the time he was going in, then feelings, do you think, were beginning to change about the war?
They probably were beginning to change in general. I think the whole country, a great many of the country, look at the protesters we had with that war. And so it was of two minds, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, you don't remember thinking that my son should not be taken because this is a bad war or anything like that?
No. It's just like you hear the people now with the boys in Iraq, you hear, they're proud that their service people are serving. They're proud that they're there. And we were proud that Mike was there. We were proud that he went in.
Did you have come to form any opinions about the people we were fighting in that war?
You mean the Vietnamese?
Yeah, how did you understand the Vietnam War at that time? I mean, who were we fighting and for what reason? Did you have ideas about that or thoughts about that?
No. And I wish Lyndon Johnson got us out of it instead of, it prolonged it for so long. And it was a foolish war. There was not, you know, there are quite a few of our wars, if you stop and think about it, in the overseas wars that were foolish to have ever been involved in. We've been lucky in this country. We have not been the host to an invasion. And we don't really know what war is, do we?
No. Would you say your views have changed over the years about war?
Definitely. I think probably. My husband was in World War II in the Navy, and he came through all right. But I didn't know him then. I didn't meet him until after he was back. But he still had that cute uniform. I have to say that. At any rate, at that point of time, I was young, and there was more, I guess I'll have to say, an exhilaration of sorts maybe involved there. That the war was, but it was going to be over. Vietnam, it became a war where it was like slogging in the mud. But it didn't leave us with anything of a good feeling, or not, I say us, me, it didn't leave. But I think the experience with Mike is what did it. And it wasn't over when Mike was discharged, because it's, as I said, it's changed his whole life.
Do you remember the protests against the Vietnam War having any effect on you? Do you remember thinking anything about them,
No.
either positively or negatively?
No, I just knew that they were doing it, but it's to each his own. I think everyone has the right to their own opinion. It's just like they got these people now lying in the streets. Where is it, down in New York this morning in the news, and they're protesting in their way. As long as they don't disrupt civil disobedience, I would never go for it. But as long as they don't disrupt, I guess they have their own right to make their own protests.
Do you see the experience of all that you know being made better or worse by that war?
The Vietnam War,
Yes.
oh, it changed our family. Because you can't partially lose one person and not have your family change. We had to go through the whole adjustment, the marriage. 3 times he came home, and they'd try again. I'll never forget the first time he called me. I was at work, and he called me and he said, "Mom, could you meet me for lunch?" And we made the appointment where, and we met. And when you sit at a table and your son is crying because the marriage is breaking up, it's heartbreaking. But that was only part of it, of course. But he never did finish well in college. He tried a couple of times, but he couldn't settle back to that. And he was a very intelligent young guy, but there's an alcohol problem now from it that's never gone away and never will. There's no way it can. But I just see all those things, and I just think, if it ever happened again, and my younger son was where he was involved, I would say, here's the money, go to Canada, get out of here.
To have views like that, as you just expressed, means that your view of the Vietnam War would have been very different from World War II.
Definitely.
As far as what we were fighting
Definitely.
for.
But remember, I was a lot younger then, and there was more whoopee in me. But I didn't have to pay. We didn't have anyone in our immediate family who was in service. You know, you could dash off a female letter, but that was not the same.
But people didn't react quite the same way to a World War II battle death in terms of whether the person died for something, as they might have in the Vietnam War, where sometimes people began to question that.
I think life was cheaper with the Vietnam War. I think there was a deeper emotional feeling and more admiration for the servicemen back in those days. Now, that is coming back with this war. Goodness knows, just all the media attention alone is doing that.
Sylvia Smith, Sylvia is going to be helping us out locally by providing some information about a local Medal of Honor winner during the Civil War, and then the Sullivan Clinton expedition up this way during the Revolutionary War. In short, some local ancient history that she's going to provide for us. So I'm going to turn it over to her as she tells us something about this brave man that won a Medal of Honor in our area.
I think, Tom, the part of it that is the most interesting, specifically to me, is the fact that he came from Wellsburg, which is my hometown, and that doesn't happen very often, to find someone who's had something so special. He was in the Civil War, and his name was Thomas Park, with an E, Gear, G-E-R-E. He was born down home, and I'm going to read most of this because it is too tight information for me to remember. He was the son of Thomas Park, Gear, and Sarah Champlin, C-H-A-M-P-L-I-N, and he was born December 10th in 1842. When he entered service, he had a fairly long career. We have done some research on that, and I definitely must tell you the name of the lady who was basically involved in this. Her name is Marie Blitz. She's the lady who we spoke about on the first part of our conversation as working with me with the cemetery. This she pretty well did on her own, so she must get the credit for it.
Was he drafted, or was he a volunteer, do you know?
Back that far, I don't have any idea. I would guess in the Civil War, and it's only a guess I'd throw out, is he probably went in just like so many did. We have not too much information on him specifically, except that he won his medal through capturing the flag. This is interesting. You wouldn't think this was such a big deal, but apparently it was. Capturing the flag of the 4th Mississippi, and that was a flag of the Confederate States. So that was what made that so special. It was when he was a first lieutenant and adjutant of the 5th Minnesota Volunteer Infantry near Nashville, Tennessee. And that was on December 16th in 1864, which would be toward the end of the war. Further than that, we don't have a great deal of information. He had quite a career, and that we have done a whole little research on. And that is here now. I just brought it in for them to copy, and that is here for anyone who wants to look into it at the Historical Society.
Are there any descendants of his in the area?
Anyone?
Any descendants of his?
Not locally now, no. There was quite a Gear family here at one time, down here and through Chemung, the town, the village of Chemung. And they kind of evolved. In fact, there was a doctor. They had a doctor. But times changed, and as so many families did, I assume they either died out or spread out, one or the other. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery, but the reason I'm really so interested in this is because he is among the honorees up in Wisner Park, who are Medal of Honor winners, and I think it's important that people know about this so that they will be able to visit the cemetery there. It's actually a park, not a cemetery, but be able to visit it. And
why don't you tell us exactly how he's remembered it in Wisner Park? I mean, what's there?
Oh, it's just the little stone with the name on it, and there's not his story isn't there, because at the time that those were done, they didn't really know this much about him. This research has come along since then. When we found out he was from our particular area, we felt very strongly that he should be honored in any way we could, and the research is what has made that happen.
Is there anything else that we need to add that you know
I don't,
about
I don't think
Lieutenant
so.
Park?
No, I don't think so. He was married and he did have a family, but they're all out in the Midwest, the last, as far as we could put a trace on them.
Well, we're going to go back now to backtrack a little bit to the beginnings of our area when during the Revolutionary War, a military expedition came our way into the area, and Mrs. Smith is going to tell us about that.
I don't think I can tell a great deal about that to anybody, because anyone who lives in the area basically knows about Sullivan Clinton expedition, Revolutionary War, and it was back in the time when the colonists were still trying to make headway into the more western areas of the country. A lot of them lived in Connecticut, but Connecticut was not just Connecticut as we know it in this day and age. Connecticut was inclusive of New York State, Pennsylvania, and those two states particularly are where the Sullivan Clinton expedition was important. The colonists wanted to spread out, and when they would try to spread out, of course, and this is something that I don't think has been considered, everybody thinks, well, the white man, he should have that land and all, but they were spreading onto Indian territory. This was where the Indians lived at one time. And so I can understand the fact that the Indian people didn't want that to happen. They resented it. And there were many raids made on the villages and towns that were established by what they called the Loyalists in those days. The Indians, and the British, and there was one particular group called Butler's Rangers, and they were a wonderful fighting force from the Niagara frontier, and they came down through. Anyway, they were all allied, and well, if anyone has heard of the Battle of Cherry Valley, the Battle of Wyoming down in Pennsylvania, all of these plus ours and on up through were a part of this campaign. The campaign was started basically through the Congress because they wanted to give the new colonists a chance to move on into the country further, and it was impeded by the groups I just mentioned. The groups worked all together, and the actual colonists worked together, and Sullivan and Clinton faced Joseph Brant, who was the head of the Indian forces, and he was an incredible statistician. He had gone to school in Europe. He was the Iroquois war chief. And I hope that people will take the time to study more about this. It's really something. At any rate, little by little, Sullivan came up through, and he landed in Chemung, the village of Chemung down in New York, but actually Chemung County too. And then the next step was to come up into our area. Now they call this the Battle of Newtown. Newtown, if you studied the history of the area, Elmira was first Newtown. But this was Newtown before Elmira was a new town. This was an Indian village called Newtown, which was in the very western part of the hamlet of Lamon across the Chemung River here, and in the town of Ashland. So that was where the actual name of it came from, not from the Elmira Newtown. The battle was fought over on the Hogbacks, which is Lamon. If you go out the old Lamon Road, out in that area, the land, like hogbacks, it's built like hogbacks, and there were hiding places and so on, and so it was a really scary affair, the battle there. So it came out to the point where finally the Indians were chased out of this area by that group of men, and the men actually went on up further, but they burned the villages and destroyed the Indian crops to get rid of them, and that was a really bad part as far as the Indians were concerned. I'm kind of halfway for the white man and halfway for the Indian. You know, it was 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, in truth. And
well, our views have changed on that over the years too.
oh my, yes. Well, I would, this is present day, but being the historian for the town where the battle took place, we have had some work with a gentleman up here who is in the Indian part of it, and he came down and spoke at our historical society meeting, and you know, he was telling wonderful things, and he brought down many Indian items that the furs that they had done, and their arrows and all kinds of things, and he would explain something, and then he would pass it hands-on through the audience, and everyone had the chance. But he said, the Indian people who come through this area now with their families, and they look for things, and there is nothing to express what the Indian stood for, and they go away with their children not ever knowing their heritage. And that's why I feel the way I do. We've been looking into it in our community, our historical society, and we're feeling very much that we must do something more on Newtown Battlefield Reservation to further the knowledge of the Indians. It's very, very important. And that hopefully is something we're going to be doing, but this is jumping the gun here. At any rate, the fact that Sullivan's men came up through this way and they saw the beautiful valley, they saw the greenery, they saw places where the water was clear and clean, and they saw the wealth of wild animals for meat, skins, so many things that they saw that impressed them. And many of the veterans of that march that came up through came back here to live. The list of the men who received bounty lands here is very impressive in the number who were involved in that expedition. And that was, I feel, the expedition itself had a great deal to do with opening up the valley to settlement and to what we have now.
Can you explain bounty land?
Yes, New York State, Pennsylvania, excuse me, had all this land, and they portioned it out. And to any veteran of that war in our area, at least, I don't know how it worked down in Pennsylvania, land was given if you had service time. That sounds funny to think Revolutionary War and service time, but nonetheless they did. So many of the men who came back received land, and then they settled it and built their homes. And you look at it and you think of the work that each of those men did, and I hope a lot of them had pretty well-grown sons to help them out, because it was quite a task to do that. But they're the ones, they're really, they'd say George Washington, the father of our country. They're the fathers of our country here. They're special to remember.
What's the relation or connection between the county park, right? Sullivan's Monument, is that a state or county?
The state has it now.
That's right. Okay.
There's a possibility that they will be turning it over. We're hoping to us if they decide that they don't want it, because we don't want it destroyed. It is too big a memorial there.
What's the connection between the location of the park and the Sullivan expedition? Is there any, or was that just a place to put the park and they put it there?
Excuse me, it's a little bit further to the west than the actual fighting ground was, but it's all part of it. That park, part of it is in the town of Elmira. The part of it that's in Ashland is where the spire is, and in that area. So we're more the eastern end of the park, town of Elmira, the western. But it is something that is too big to forget. It is, well, August 29th, 1779 was the battle, and that is a long time ago. And now they're beginning to have reenactments up there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them or not, Tom, but they are beginning to, through that, to teach a lot of the school children about some of our early history and so on, and that part of it is important for them to know their heritage here in the area.
It seems quite clear that you feel a neglected part of local history is Indian history.
Yeah, I do.
Are there resources that you think that need to be looked at? Are there places that people need to go and look? Are there any written documents that might shed light on this that you're aware of? How might we go about learning some more about these local Indians here in our area?
Well, one of the ways, and that's one of the ways that we have learned more about, even about the Sullivan Clinton expedition, are the writings that come through. I have some copy written by, it wasn't a whole journal, but it was done by one of the, not Grant, but one of the commanding Indian, I don't know what his term was now, what the term to call him was,
Mm-hmm.
but through writings, basically, I think. But we also have, for instance, over on the Lama Flats, they have been digging over there, and they found 2 longhouses over there. There's so many things in 200 years plus that have just melted into the ground, but they're there. And of course, the river washing down through there so many times, I think, has gone to cover it up. But there is a lot of that sort of thing.
Who's doing the digging?
I think SUNY Binghamton, the last I knew, was the only one working at it. But they have done it for at least 2 or 3 years now. And that is a part of it. There are many little ways that we have that we're going to have to pursue. Right now, we're working on something that's, I'll have to say, I'm going to say the white man. The terms are kind of not always so nice. I don't mean it that way, and I don't mean any disrespect saying red man or white man. But the little cemetery down in Lyman called the Knoll or the Baldwin Cemetery, well, it sounds like, gee, they're all Baldwin people. Well, they're not all Baldwin people. Some of the men killed in the battle, Sullivan's battle, we are tracing. It takes a lot of work, but the SAR particularly is involved with us. We're tracing those people and finding out names, where they came from, their rank, all kinds of things. And I think that we can do the same thing with the Indian area. I know Butler's Rangers has done a great deal of work. I've had some of that. I've gotten hold of some. They, of course, are not Indians, but they worked with the Indians. And Brant, there is a lot of copy on him and his qualifications and what he did, his career and so on, that I found. And so I'm working with that. And I'm just trying to do my teeny little part and put together with all the other teeny little parts. I think we'll get somewhere. I want to do a brochure to start with that can be picked up there,
Well,
and that's what I'm hoping for.
It sounds like perhaps that someone might want to make contact with the people at SUNY Binghamton, find out if there's an individual that's carrying on this project, because there may be some things coming out of that we would want to know locally.
Right. Well, I believe that they have done some appearing at several organizations, so there is something coming out from there that will probably give us some help. And there are also several people who are of Indian heritage who are interested in this or have information. There is a whole wide field of us, of it out there for us to work with, and I think given time we'll have something well worthwhile. Takes time.
Is there anything else that you can think of that we need to add to what
About
you just
Newtown?
said about Newtown or the Sullivan expedition and its impact on our area?
I don't think so. I think basically we've covered it. There's not any great amount. And Sullivan's, all of his officers, almost all of them, we have now found their journals, their diaries, so there's information coming out there, which is of great interest. It's so exciting. I just hope I can live long enough to get this well along before I go.
I'd say that there's a good chance of that.
Thank you.
Should we finish up now? I mean,
Mhm.
we don't have anything. Okay, well, we're going to terminate tape 2 at this point. We've done everything we set out to do, and I'd like to thank Mrs. Smith for coming and sharing all of her information with us.
Thank you, Tom, for bearing with me. Oh, and all the stuttering.